The Great Depression, a descent into economic darkness. The Great Depression was not merely an economic downturn, it was a collapse of hope, a slow suffocation of the American dream. Between 1929 and the late 1930s, the world witnessed an unprecedented unraveling of prosperity, where fortunes vanished overnight, hunger gnawed at the guts of millions, and despair became the defining emotion of an era. At its core, the Depression was the result of deep structural flaws in the economy, exacerbated by policy failures, reckless speculation, and, most tragically, the self-inflicted wound of protectionist tariffs. What began as a financial panic spiraled into a decade of suffering because of human decisions that turned a crisis into a catastrophe. Now, before we move on with the story, please help a small channel grow. Like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. Okay, back to the story. The roots of the collapse. The 1920s had been a decade of illusion. On the surface, America was thriving, factories hummed, stock prices soared, and consumerism flourished. But beneath this glittering facade, the foundations were rotting. Speculative frenzy and the stock market bubbled. The stock market had become a casino, fueled by easy credit and blind optimism. People borrowed heavily to buy stocks, convinced prices would rise forever. Margin buying, purchasing stocks with borrowed money, meant that when the crash came, millions were wiped out instantly. On Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929, the illusion shattered. Fortunes evaporated, banks called in loans, and the economy began its freefall. Banking panics and the credit collapse. Banks, already weakened by reckless lending, began to fail as panicked depositors rushed to withdraw their savings. With no deposit insurance, bank runs became death sentences for financial institutions. As credit dried up, businesses could no longer borrow to survive. Factories closed. Unemployment exploded. The financial system itself was bleeding out. Overproduction and underconsumption. Industrial output had surged in the 1920s, but wages had not kept pace. Workers could not afford to buy the very goods they produced. Warehouses filled with unsold cars, radios, and appliances. When demand collapsed, so did production. Layoffs spread like a plague. Agricultural collapse. Farmers, already drowning in debt from overexpansion and falling crop prices, were hit by the Dust Bowl, a biblical-scale disaster of drought and dust storms that turned fertile land into a wasteland. Starvation crept into rural America. These were the kindling. Then came the spark that turned crisis into calamity: tariffs. How tariffs deepened the abyss. In 1930, as the economy teetered, Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, raising import duties to record levels. The goal was to protect American industries from foreign competition. Instead, it strangled global trade and accelerated economic ruin. Retaliation and trade wars. Other nations, furious at being shut out of the US market, retaliated with their own tariffs. Global trade, already weakened by the Depression, collapsed. Between 1929 and 1933, world trade plummeted by 66%. American farmers and factories lost their foreign markets, deepening overproduction and unemployment. The death of international cooperation. The tariffs destroyed any hope of coordinated recovery. Countries turned inward, adopting beggar-thy-neighbor policies that only worsened the global slump. The economic isolationism fed nationalism, setting the stage for the political extremism that would later explode into World War II. Bankruptcies and further deflation. With exports crushed, businesses failed in droves. Prices kept falling in a vicious cycle of deflation. People delayed purchases, expecting prices to drop further, which only worsened the economic paralysis. A decade of suffering. The consequences were apocalyptic. Unemployment reached 25%. Men sold apples on street corners, waited in breadlines, or rode freight trains as hobos. Families were evicted, living in shantytowns called Hoovervilles. Makeshift shelters of cardboard and tin became symbols of a broken nation. Hunger was rampant. Children scavenged for scraps, malnutrition, diseases like pellagra spread. Suicide surged. Bankers jumped from windows, farmers swallowed poison, fathers who could no longer provide took their own lives. The New Deal eventually brought relief, but recovery was slow and incomplete. It took World War II, a cataclysm of blood and steel, to finally drag the economy out of the abyss. The lesson written in Ruin, the Great Depression, was not an act of God. It was the result of greed, short-sightedness, and the fatal arrogance of policymakers who believed they could wall off the economy from the world. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff stands as one of history's greatest blunders, a lesson in how protectionism can turn recession into ruin. Even now, the ghosts of the 1930s whisper warnings. Economic nationalism, trade wars, and financial recklessness still tempt nations toward self-destruction. The Depression proved that when economies turn inward, when cooperation dies, the darkness only grows deeper. And darkness, once unleashed, is never easily dispelled. Thank you for watching my video. Please, like and subscribe.